Matter of fact, there are three ways that we fail, and we do it spectacularly, and we don't believe it. As a matter of fact, if you hook most of us up to a lie detector and ask us, this is what we do.
We're going to run a few tests. This is a simple lie detector. I'll ask you a few yes or no questions, and you just answer truthfully. Do you understand?
Yes.
Human systems have had to understand the hard way, not because we're more brilliant in aviation, for instance, as aviators, or nuclear power generation is, but because the stakes were too high. There's a book about nuclear power generation called Hostages of Each Other. All they needed was one more 3 Mile Island. That would have KO'd the entire industry. That would have been the end. They had to put together an organization that gave them the kind of feedback that Leapfrog has been doing and organizing, that put it on the basis of saying, if we don't take care of ourselves, we can't wait for the government to do it. We got to do it ourselves. We can't let safety slip ever again. And in aviation, it was more messy, but over time, we changed our own culture too. Perception. We perceive things wrongly. Dallas, Texas, 1988. Don't have time for this full accident, but we lost 17 people in a Delta Airlines flight on takeoff from Dallas on a trip going to Salt Lake City. Delta, you remember them. They're the ones who bought Northwest, and they've also given us the phrase, I don't know where I'm going to go when I die, but I do know I'll change in Atlanta. All of you multiple-mile flyers on Delta know what I'm talking about. 3 highly qualified, highly trained, highly capable pilots, nobody drunk, nobody on drugs, nobody tired, looked at a panel, said 15-15 green. That relates to the flaps, those big moving panels on the back of the wing, and the flaps were actually at 0-0, and there had never been a green light. How does that happen? It happens the same way a doctor looks at a chart and reads something as a 0.0, which is a 0.1. It's the same way that we misread anything. It's the same way that we don't hear somebody talking to us because we make an assumption of what we thought they said. Perception is not what we think it is, and we don't think we're as bad as we are. Assumption, here's a simple one. We got to get this inculcated in every hospital in America. If you make an assumption before you do it, if that assumption could hurt a patient, do you have the moral, ethical, or legal right to make that assumption? Because I would say to you, no. If you can't imagine yourself explaining this to a bereaved family on the other end of the equation, then don't do it. Make sure of what's in that little white cup. Don't assume what's in that little white cup, or whatever other assumption it might be. We get used to saying, oh, it's a patient's responsibility to accept the fact that I have to make assumptions because I'm so busy. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. There is nothing more paramount than patient safety. Sue said it very well. And as a matter of fact, Sue, is there anybody in the world more qualified, more morally and ethically qualified to stand before anybody in healthcare and get their full, undivided attention than somebody whose life has been highly impacted? Than someone like Sue Sheridan? My God, the arrogance of anybody who would turn and walk away. And yet in New Mexico, 2 years ago, a fellow by the name of Steve Rell's son, is brought home in the evening from a tonsillectomy, routine operation that's overdone in many parts of the country. And he's worried. He calls the hospital and they said, oh, no, it's just normal for him to be lethargic. He said he has some other symptoms, but he's blown off. So he finally is told to let his son sleep. He closes the door, comes back in to check on him at 11, and he's cold and dead, and he's been bleeding out the entire time. Well, that's the worst of the story for the family. But it gets even worse because when he tries to get the hospital to even tell him what happened, they won't talk to him. 3 weeks later, he walks into the hospital, sees the surgeon coming at him. The surgeon turns and races down another corridor to prevent having to talk to him. There is nothing but shame in that, and that's what we've got to be very vociferous about. A doctor, no matter how hard it is for he or she to come in and apologize, that is your duty. That is your duty. And it's our duty to make sure that this is a standard. I don't think any of us would put up with it if it were our family. And that was the little moniker I had at the very first. If it were your child, ... If it were your wife, your husband, would you make the same decision? We'll know when we're where we need to go when nobody calls up on a unit and says, oh, I just wanted to let you know that the wife of one of the directors is going to be coming to your unit next week. Oh, gee, that's good. So I'm going to give them special care that I don't give to anybody else. How insulting, and yet how necessary. We were doing a seminar a couple of years ago, actually only about a year and a half ago, and we asked, there must have been 1,000 people in there. They were all managers. Would you write down just a number on the back of this piece of paper that's on the table? The number of the people who are under your command who you would not let take care of your mother if she came into the unit today. You know how many numbers we got? 1,900. The CEO was stunned beyond words. Perception, assumption, and of course communication.